So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. My name is Ethan Linden. I am the Director of Educational Operations and Design. I think that's my title. If I look confused, it's because I'm not exactly sure what my title is. At the Hartman Institute in North America. I also have a long history at this synagogue, and it's always great to be at Bethel in New Rochelle. Thank you. That's an easy applause line when you say the name of the place you are. I just want to let everybody know that for the Hartman Institute, this is the final event of 2 weeks of programming around Israel at 75. We began 2 weeks ago at Central Synagogue, where Micha Goodman was in conversation with Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, and we've gone through these past 2 weeks all over the city of New York and outside of the city of New York, having Hartman scholars in conversation with and sometimes in celebration with communities as we think about and celebrate and interrogate this extraordinary moment in Jewish history. The Hartman Institute believes as a fundamental principle that we should be celebrating this moment as Israel enters its 76th year. And the Hartman Institute believes also that at this moment we should be discussing and thinking about and sometimes arguing about what it means to be celebrating this extraordinary moment in Jewish history. And as I'm sure you're going to hear tonight, the Hartman Institute believes that at this moment, the North American Jewish community needs to be engaged in this conversation, needs to be engaged with the State of Israel, and needs to stay in partnership with the State of Israel as it moves forward. I'm really thrilled tonight to bring you Rabbi David Schuck, who I'm sure many of you know. I'm so proud to be able to bring him to this community. It's really exciting for Hartman to be able to do that. And Donniel Hartman, who is the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, who is in from Israel. And who does not like us to recite long bios about him, so suffice to say you should take a look in your program books, but we're really in for a treat tonight. Donniel is one of the foremost thinkers about Israel and Zionism today, and if you're interested in hearing more from him, you should certainly listen to For Heaven's Sake, the podcast that he hosts along with Yossi Klein-Alevi and Alana Stein-Hain. And what's going to happen is we're going to have some conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you all so much for being here. David, Donniel, take it away.
It really, it's an honor to be with you, to share a riser with you. And we feel really privileged here at Bethel to be able to host you this evening. And I think the question I'd like to start with, which is the question most people here are curious about, is just a general, what is it like right now in Israel with all that's been going on? What's it been like for you as a passionate thinker about Zionism, and what is it like for you as just a citizen of your own country?
Hi, everyone. David, it's really nice to be with you. It's exciting, it's exhilarating, it's disturbing, sometimes it's depressing, and it's always exhausting. Because the first thing, before we get into the stuff, it's just all-consuming right now. Israel is a full-time relationship. The future of Israel is a full-time relationship. You worry about it, you think about it, you demonstrate, you talk. It's made work really hard because I'm working full-time as a citizen right now. Full-time, I'm looking at the Hartman Institute, and I'm watching things, and my job is to push. I'm a nudge. That's what a president of an institute is. You're supposed to nudge. You're supposed to push and push and push. But everybody's at 60% capacity. At best, because at least 40% of everything is being a citizen right now. And being a citizen is trying to figure out what you want, Being a citizen is trying to figure out what your responsibility is at this moment. Being a citizen requires studying things that you didn't know before. I've spent about 150 hours, conservatively, just studying what the reform is about. Just studying it. Like that's over and above my job. You know what I mean? Like, I thought to be a rabbi, I had to know Maimonides. Then at a certain point of time, I also had to know nuclear fusion and centrifuges because I had to deal with Iraq. But, like, who knew? And it's a very, very intense time, but it is exhilarating because the citizens of Israel have woken up. They're not passive. They're not just thinking about foreign policy or even economic policy. They're thinking about their country. And what country do I want to live in? And to be part of that time is principally exhilarating.
Wow. Did you expect that answer? Exhilarating and an awakening. So this is great for us. I think one of the questions, and after I answer this, we're going to switch microphones. I think this one's louder. It would be helpful to give us a sense, when you speak about liberal Zionism, will you give us a sense of what that means in your thinking and how that's connected to this awakening?
Hi, everyone. Liberal Zionism is connected to a political movement called liberal democracy, and it's also connected to liberal Judaism. Liberal Zionism is founded on the principle, very similar to the Declaration of Independence, in which the creation of the state as a homeland for the Jewish people was the first cause or the first agenda. But it doesn't exhaust the meaning of Zionism. There is no Zionism unless the Jewish people are safe. There is no Zionism unless the Jewish people have a country in which we could be normal. There is no liberal Zionism unless that homeland represents the best values of our people. Unless that country is a country liberal in the sense, in the political sense, liberal democracy, of liberties. A country which believes that all human beings are created in the image of God, and that human beings are endowed with inalienable rights, that we as a country, all the while working to create a strong and viable country, worry about its soul. One way of looking at liberal Zionism is a Zionism which worries about the moral fiber of the country. That's one part of liberal Zionism. Liberal Zionism is also connected to liberal Judaism. And liberal Judaism is a Judaism which believes that while we have a 3,000-year-old past, the modern world has produced great new ideas for Torah, which we need to incorporate into our religious system. And you could be modern, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, renewal, post-denominational, secular, any of the above, even a nun. The N-O-N-Es, I mean, not the N-U-Ns. You could be any of the above. Liberal Judaism is about a conversation between a tradition which teaches us much truth and value, and a world which teaches us much truth and value. So when those two together, Israel's a country where the best of the modern world and our moral principles and aspirations meet realpolitik and the decision and the need of the Jewish people to be safe and secure. Liberal Zionism is that on one foot.
So part of this leads us into I think for us here in the States, a rich discussion around what it means for us to be in relationship with that country, right? That's striving to bring liberal values to the public square and conversations about Judaism, morality. And here, I recently went on a mission through the Federation, and we met with a number of politicians. This was about a month ago. And almost every single politician said to us, we don't really care what you think. Some in those words, and some in sort of the subtext of what they were saying is, Reform Judaism, liberal Judaism, this isn't a thing here in Israel. We're not interested. You know, at one point someone said, if you really care about those issues and how they unfold in the public square, then if 1 million of you make Aliyah, then we can have that conversation. So what does that mean for, in your thinking, for liberal Jews who are trying to have the conversation, and what they're hearing on the other side is, well, that's really an American conversation, not for us?
First of all, thank you for that question. First, I want to let you in on a secret, but you can't tell anybody. It's just us. Israelis love aggravating you. They love to aggravate you. And they do it intentionally. They do it intentionally. It's a passive-aggressive move, which is an outgrowth of their dependency. See, Israelis hate being dependent on you because you're not supposed to be here. According to Zionist ideology, you're supposed to be dead. I want you to understand that. According to Zionist ideology, this shul shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. You should have either died in a second-generation Holocaust or die through assimilation. That is core Zionist ideology. And you need to understand this. Core Zionist ideology is that the only future for the Jewish people is in Israel. The world is divided into two, Shoah and Tkuma. Shoah is a word you all know. Tkuma is the Hebrew word for rebirth. Lakum, the standing up again. Tkuma, according to Zionism, only happens in Israel, which means by default, where are you? You're in the domain of Shoah. The whole reason for creating the state of Israel was because there is no future. Zionism wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Either Jews were dying or Judaism was dying when it was disconnected from its land. Now, Zionism has had to deal with 75 years of needing you. And that aggravates. So do you remember they used to love to say, I'm an Israeli, not a Jew. That was another thing. Oh, they don't say that to themselves. They say it to all their Jewish cousins who come to visit them when you're coming on a mission. And I have my cousins in Bat Yam and this. Like, I'm an Israeli, I'm not a Jew. It's a way of creating a mechitza. And the other way is to try to intimidate you into being evangelical. Support us without any moral conditions. That's what it means. That's evangelical support for Israel. Support us, but no conditions. Now, you can't blame somebody. Like, why not? If that's not a bad, like, if you could get it, like, why not? If you could get an unlimited bank account, unconditional, like, and for many years, that's what you gave us. For many years, when you came to Israel, you were all starry-eyed. That's what you were. The aura of 67. The aura of power. The aura of victory. The ability, the aura of settlement of over 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopian Jewry. Like, Israel, in many ways, has a bigger than life quality to it. And you would come and you were like starry-eyed teenagers. And you can't blame somebody for not liking or wanting that relationship. They like it. They like thinking that they're celebrities. I'm a celebrity. You don't ask me. You don't question me. You don't tell me what to do. You are blessed to live in my aura. And you did that. But now, you want to have a more mature relationship. And you actually understand that unless you have a mature relationship, you won't have a relationship. Because there's one thing that's certain about North American Jewry. You're not going to become evangelical. You're not. And more of you are bringing your Judaism and your liberal Judaism and asking, how does Israel fit into that? So part of what they're saying is to aggravate you. Part of it is to try to hold on to an old conversation that's already dead. Part of it, from certain segments of the society, it's true. For certain segments, it's true. But liberal Judaism is alive and vibrant in Israel. We don't have category. In Israel, you're Jewish. We don't have categories. We have tribes, very often ethnic tribes. We even have a religious secular tribe. But what type of Jew you are is Jew. Now, the vast majority of Israeli Jews actually live liberal Jewish lives. And that goes from the religious, at least a third and maybe half of the religious Zionist community, to traditional, secular, and everybody in between. Haredim aren't liberal Jews. That's true. They're not. Israeli Arabs aren't liberal Jews. Even though many of them are now discovering that their greatest ally is North American liberal Jews. But that's for another conversation. It's an interesting awakeness. They used to think that there was a limited amount of oxygen, and if you were in the room, you were taking their place at the table. Now they're realizing that you're their serious ally. But the vast majority of Israeli Jews don't see themselves as Israeli anymore. They see themselves as Jewish. And what type of Jews are they? They're Jews who engage in an active process of selecting for themselves what type of Jewish life they want to live. They have and they live according to the Jewish calendar. But they pick and select how much of that they want to keep and how much of that they don't want to keep. The vast majority of them believe that there are multiple types of authentic Judaisms. The vast majority of Israeli Jews believe that you have a right to pick and choose and to live a Jewish life that fits your ideology. A vast majority of them have integrated core modern values into their Judaism. And there are certain checks. So gender, check. LGBTQ, check. These are non-Jews, check. Half a check. Sometimes a check. Democracy, check. So they actually, most of them, live lives not very different from yours. They're actually quite observant, even though they don't go to shul. But they're very observant on an individual level. They don't bring their liberal Judaism yet into the voting booth. But they bring their liberal Judaism into their own personal lives. So when those say, what is this liberal Judaism? There's categories. There's North American tribes that don't exist in Israel. They're foreign. Now, the ultra-Orthodox parties see you as their enemy. They've always seen you as their enemy. You not meaning diaspora Jews. You as in Reform and conservative Jews. Ultra-Orthodoxy starts as a response to the Reform movement in Germany and Hungary. It's a response to Reform Judaism's methodology of keeping Jews in the fold and not leaving. And as Jews in emancipation, when Jews started to leave, Reform Judaism said, how do I compete? Reform Judaism was the first Baal Tshuva movement in the Jewish world. That's what it was. It was, how do I bring people back? How do I create a Judaism that could compete for the emancipated Jew of Europe? The ultra-Orthodox ideology was that when people are leaving, you don't compromise, you create bigger walls. You create something strong that doesn't move, which will then attract, and those who won't, let them leave. That battle of ultra-Orthodoxy made Aliyah. And so within Israeli politics, those on the right wing, or up till now, the ultra-Orthodox parties have found very strong coalition partners with the political right wing, even though there's no real connection between them. I know this is a long answer, but it's like it's a story. There's a story here. You know, Netanyahu is not exactly a lover of Judaism. He's Chazer Treif on Yom Kippur. No, I'm serious. Like, he just went now to England. Like, where was he in Europe and they caught him at a non-kosher restaurant? If somebody from the Labour Party would have been caught doing that, the coalition would have fallen. One of the stories about Netanyahu is that he forced an electrician on Yom Kippur to come to his house in Caesarea to fix something. Like, it's like Netanyahu is a liberal-ish. He's a Parab Jew. He is. He's not a liberal Jew. He's a Parab Jew. He's not exactly the great lover of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. He doesn't, Gantz puts on tefillin every day. I don't think Netanyahu owns a pair of tefillin. Now, why the two of them have become bedfellows is an interesting story. I think that story is about to end in the next election, but that'll come later on tonight. But because of that, there is a segment of Israeli non-ultra-Orthodox who buy into the Jewish language of their coalition partners. One of the most exciting things that's happening now in Israel is that when you leave the politicians in the street with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, They see you as as their partners. They see you as their natural partners. And they want you involved. Those who don't want you involved are principally those who want to keep the status quo in place. And right now, what's changing in Israel is the status quo, which has existed for decades, is coming to an end. And those who want to keep you out know that your voice can contribute to that transformation.
So I want you to be able to have water, but I don't have a long question. That leads us to the natural follow-up, which is if there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who really do want us involved, what is it that they want from us? And I will say, in the last, maybe since January, February, the question I've gotten the most from people in the shul around Israel is, what can we do? So I think people would love to hear your reflections on some abstract ideas about what that looks like and some real action items of what it looks like.
Let me go straight to an action item.
Great.
What would it look like if 200 shuls around North America signed up? And every month, 50 of them on Sunday from 12 to 1 Zoomed together, demonstrated, showed up. What happens if 10,000, 20,000 North American Jews showed up once a month? Not every week. It's hard. It's hard. It's easier in Israel. Every Motzei Shabbos, when you're it's a different energy. You know what we want from you? To show up. Show up. Now imagine 2, 3, 4, 500 synagogues with hundreds of thousands of people signing, talking about what type of Israel they want. Not demonstrating against Israel, demonstrating for the Israel you want. What happens if the most meaningful thing you can do right now is not money? It's not traveling to Israel. That too. Money's valuable, in particular to the Shalom Hartman Institute. Show up. You want a voice? Take it. There is such passivity in the relationship to Israel when it doesn't need to be that way. Now imagine if federations bought in. Imagine if the different alphabets in Jewish life were also competing, because most of them don't have a constituency, and all of a sudden, shuls have constituents. And no one wants to be a leader who was left behind by the people. There's some irony which I hope you were sensitive to. Show up. And I want to tell you, in Israel, we never report about anything that goes on in North America unless it's anti-Semitism statistics or assimilation statistics. Other than that, garnished. Nada. Now, over the last 3 months, anything you do, whether it was 100 people petitioning Smotrich, whether it was some, what do they call those things you sign in the newspaper, petitions, whatever. They're all reported on the front page. The problem is that you're not used to or we haven't activated regular, consistent activism. Go back to marching for Soviet Jewry. You remember those times? Or, you know, I remember in Montreal, freezing. Montreal's always freezing. I remember because that's where we lived. And I remember going and marching in front of the Russian consulate. Thank God there was this really exclusive kosher restaurant right across the street. So like in Montreal, like no one wants. So you go in, you eat, then you go out and demonstrate. But we're not used to showing up. You want a voice? Show up. Can I be more concrete? Start a movement. Even if in every synagogue 100 people show up, bring music. Doesn't have to be demonstrations. One of the nice things about them, it's not a heavy, it's not that, it's something else. Think about it. There might be a Dvar Torah. There might be a little piece. You might read a piece of the Declaration of Independence, discuss it. 100 people, or 100 of you, will you show up every month, once a month? That's all I'm asking from you. I'm not asking every Saturday night. I'm not asking. Once a month. Synagogues all across America. I want to tell you, every Israeli will know about it. And every Israeli who is in the street will be strengthened by it. Israel matters to you. So fight for it. When I go to demonstrate, I'm not demonstrating against the government, even though I am. I'm together with hundreds of thousands of people talking about what type of country I want. What does democracy mean? What are our commitments? What's our positions about people's freedoms, whether those freedoms have to do with women being on the back of a bus, whether it has to do with Arabs, whether it has to do with religious freedom. This is what we're talking about in the demonstrations. So, show up. And guess what? Someone who shows up never asks permission. Permission, like, do you know, can we talk? Like, you know. Like, have any of you ever been, like, you're in families, and sometimes we have to take care of an elderly person in the family, right? A parent. Like, there's some of the siblings just show up, right? Like, I'm sure, like, well, some of them, like, someone said, you're there. Then there's always some who call. Call me when you need something. Like, call me, like, really? Yeah, call me, should I come? Like, what do you, just show up. When someone's in the hospital, guess what you do? You show up. You don't start by saying, oh, who's there? What time should I be? You know, call me when you're tired. You know what I'm talking about, right? You're on one side of everybody. Every family has it. And in each case, it's the way we divide up our relationships and the way we take care of things. Just, you don't need Israelis to say you should show up. You have to stand up and say, Israel is mine. And that's true. I'm not dying for Israel. So I'm not going to show up now and talk to you about whether you should walk out of the West Bank or Judea Samaria or even what you should call it. But when it comes to democracy, when it comes to the moral character and principles and legal system of this country, that's not a life and death. That you can't tell me, excuse me, your son is not on the line. We're not talking about our physical survival. We're talking about our moral and spiritual survival, and that is equally affecting you as it affects us. If Israel goes in a certain direction, you're gone. And Jewish life, since the 60s, the most exciting and vibrant thing in Jewish life, for good and for bad, has been Israel. Take out Israel from Jewish life, and Jewish identity is in real crisis. So fight for it.
Will you spend a little bit more time on the very last thing you were saying, which is, I think, a reflection of this deeply ingrained, I would say, immature relationship between diaspora Jewry, or certainly American Jewry, and Israeli Jewry. I hear this a lot from people, and I bet people were thinking this, which is that very last piece. Well, I don't vote. I don't send my children to Tzahal. So how do I figure out when it's disloyal, that's the word that often people use, to protest against something in a public way?
Great. Let's be, we're talking, right? It's true. It's difficult to be you. I wouldn't want to be you. That's why I moved to Israel. It really is hard. Long distance relationships are tough. They usually don't work at the end of the day. It's very tough. It's not an easy thing to look from 6,000 miles away and what's your place and what's your role. It's a hard thing. Really is. Now, let me be I'm always straight. Like I don't know how to do anything else. So you like me, you don't like me, I am who I am. I don't want any of you telling me when my son should go to war. I don't mind if you have an opinion. I don't want you telling me. You can have an opinion. You can talk about it. But that's a tough one. Got to tell you, it's a tough one. And you know who knows it's tough? You. North American Jewry, by and large, for decades now, at least since Oslo, when you have experienced more than, in North America, you still talk about an occupation. In Israel, we don't even talk about an occupation anymore. It's now called the contested territories, not the occupied territories. But you knew, and give yourself credit for it. Instinctively, you knew the term spasnisht? It's a very, very critical term. Spasnisht. It's not right. Like, if my kid was there, but it's, I could have an opinion, but don't say it too loudly, and certainly don't, it's complicated, and you knew that. The problem is that you've activated that category for everything about Israel instead of making distinctions about when it's pasnisht and when it's not pasnisht. When's it appropriate and when's it not appropriate? So when it comes to war, it's a little more complicated. I appreciate that. And even that has limits. Because one of the things that our tradition tells us is that it is a mitzvah to be a critic of fellow Jews. It's one of the 613 commandments. No joke. Hocheach tocheach et amitecha is one of the 613 commandments. If you see a fellow Jew doing something wrong, you're obligated under Jewish law to tell them. Obligated. Remaining silent makes you culpable for their actions. But because issues of security have dominated so much of the conversation, it was very hard for you to figure out what you're supposed to do. Even state and religion became a security issue. Why? Because it's coalitions. And Israelis would say, I don't like it either, but I need this coalition for what? For the safety of Israel. So you have to tolerate disrespect towards your Judaism, just like I in Israel have to tolerate disrespect to my Judaism, so that we will have a coalition so that Israel will be safe and secure. And this has been our mantra. This has nothing, the issues today, you're just not used to it. We're at a different moment now. For the first time in decades, Israelis are marching not for security. They're marching for the essence and the soul of Israel. That's a different. Now, it's not by accident that you don't know what to do, because we're not, even in Israel, we didn't know exactly what to do. And it took a little while to find the voice. But very quickly, I remember when I was in Habima, do you know what it's like to be with 30,000 flags? 100,000 people with 30,000 flags? In anti-government demonstration? My colleague Yossi Klein Halevi speaks about it. He says, when are you protesting the government with the flag? Like, really? Because it's my country. There's something is happening. So you just have to switch gears, my friends. Yeah, it's there. It's another moment where, shh, be quiet, doesn't apply to you right now. So all of your instincts, the lovers of Israel have been trained. Shh. We've been trained to tell people, shh. Also, you want to know another one, a funny one? This is like, it's public. I remember. Don't criticize Israel in public. Remember that one? Now, what happens if you're living in a time where there is no such thing as private? You're aware of social media? Like, you're aware that when you want to communicate with people, it's not the New York Times ad anymore. It's your Facebook post. But people are still saying private, public. These categories aren't relevant. So we're at a different time. And at a different time, you need different responses. And so I find it fascinating how it's almost, we're having an anachronistic conversation, but it's mostly because lovers of Israel have literally been trained. We have trained you. Shh. The enemy, don't say it, the enemies of Israel have said it. Shh. When someone criticizes Israel, your job is to what? Defend it. As if the best defense is defending. Sometimes the best defense is offense. Sometimes the best defense is maneuvering. Sometimes the best defense is changing your positions. But we've been trained. And now, you're at a very, very interesting time. Because the shh is not working anymore. The shh are dying out. It's not enough. If Israel's going to be important, those of you who love Israel have to care about whether Israel will still be important for people. And shh doesn't make you a lover of Israel anymore. So the lovers of Israel are, I think it was Mark Twain who said, they mean well in the worst sense of the term. You mean well, but you're actually hurting Israel right now. Because shh doesn't work. Your children, grandchildren aren't going to be inspired by an Israel whose primary message is shh. And now you have a cause. And you can show up. And you can bring your kids. And you can bring your grandchildren. And you can talk about values. And a moral valued conversation about Israel does not have to be the domain of the anti-Israel camp. It could be the essence of the pro-Israel camp. So take it. It's there. You just have to get used to a different muscle, a different time schedule, and a different way of exhibiting your love for Israel.
I'm glad we have you on record, a recording of this. This is very inspiring for me to hear. I'm sure for others too. I'd like to shift gears a little bit. In a conversation I had with an activist in Jerusalem, I asked about the Palestinian citizens of Israel and where are they in this moment? I don't see them. And she said that within the Arab community, there's sort of this cynicism, like, oh, suddenly the Jews have realized there's no democracy or there's a threat to democracy. We've known this for a very long time and have not really played a significant role, at least in a public way, in these protests. So can you speak a bit about how this moment is touching on the Palestinian community, both citizens of Israel and in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank?
They're two separate communities. And Israeli Arab Palestinians, and by the way, get used to calling them that, because that's the way the majority of Israeli Arab Palestinians call themselves. And part of the future of building a relationship is getting used to calling somebody by the name that they call themselves. It's an exercise that you apply to many areas of your life, and we have to start applying it there too. Israeli Arab Palestinians, one of Muhammad Darawshe has this famous line where he said, or actually others as well, Israel sees itself as a Jewish democracy. It's Jewish for its Israeli Arab Palestinian community, and it's democratic for Israelis, for Israeli Jews. That's a long-standing beef with much merit. Because outside of the right to vote, Israel hasn't embraced Israeli Arab Palestinians as full citizens. There's a right to vote. That has been preserved since 1964. Other than that, Israeli Jews still don't have a narrative, a story, which unites them with Israeli Arab Palestinians. We have a story that unites us. We came out of Egypt together. We have a anthem which speaks about our tikva bat shnot alpayim, a 2,000-year-old aspiration. But 20% of our society weren't waiting for the Jews to come home. They just weren't. Whether they were fine or not, whether they were a people beforehand or not, that just doesn't matter. They weren't waiting for you. And Israeli Jews still don't have a share. So like I had this weekend with 50 principals in a program of the Hartman Institute, in which I'm trying to activate the principals to become activists for liberal Zionism. And I said, the children of Israel today, Bnei Israel, is the Jewish community in Israel. Bnei Israel is the Jewish community around the world. And Bnei Israel are Israeli Arab Palestinians. I said they're part of Bnei Israel. Welcome to sovereignty. You wanted a country? Guess what? They're Bnei Israel. Half were with me straight out. Another quarter took a whole weekend. And another quarter, I am a walking abomination. Now, in this environment, it is a very complicated place for Israeli Arab Palestinians. Their leadership is very poor. 85% of them want to be Israeli citizens. 85% of Israeli Arab Palestinians, and this is consistently, when they're given a choice, if there is a two-state solution, where do you want to be? And not even talking about leaving your village. If we could, in the land swaps, if we could just swap your village and added to the Palestinian future state, where do you want to be? 85% say, I want to be in Israel. I want to be an Israeli citizen. But they know that Israeli Jews don't have a narrative for them. Truth be told, they don't have a worked out narrative for what they want. And it is truly very difficult. So you remember when Koch, Jews in North America are always very sensitive about the dual loyalty claim. Like, who are you more loyal to? So Koch, of blessed memory, what was his line? He said, I support Israel. If Israel ever attacks the United States, I'll fight on the side of the United States. And until that doesn't happen, there's no problem with my dual loyalty, right? Now, if you're a Palestinian, what are you supposed to say? Palestinians have dual loyalties. They do. Just like we Jews do. We do. I didn't see. Do you have an Israeli flag in the sanctuary? Shh, don't tell anybody. Could you imagine if the word got out? We have dual loyalties. And you want to know something? We don't have dual loyalties. We have quadruple loyalties. Because that's what people have. We have multiple loyalties, and we try to work them out. And we balance them. Palestinians in Israel have dual loyalties in the midst of a conflict. So they also don't have it worked out. Palestinians in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria do not see themselves as partners with Israeli Arab Palestinians. They see them as people who betrayed. You're not part of the struggle. So who are they? Now, in the midst of this, it's a very strange thing. They didn't find that the Supreme Court fought for them. On certain cases it did. But there's been consistent discrimination in the allocation of funds, in the allocation of land, in the building of industrial zones, in getting building permits for homes, new Arab cities. Can anybody tell me what is the new Arab village that was started over the last, tell me the 10 Arab cities that were started, that were created over the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. You can't tell me. Zero. So what are they supposed to do? You know, when Yafo gets gentrified, gentrification is wonderful, right? Prices of real estate go up and it's progress and everything's nice. When an Israeli Jew gets stuck in a neighborhood that's too expensive for them, when Yafo becomes too expensive, what do? You move to Bat Yam. If you're an Israeli Arab Palestinian who gets priced out of Yafo, where do you go? You have nowhere to go. You can't go to Bat Yam. You can't. No one will rent you their house. So in this moment, it's actually, it's one of those, you know, where we expect you, but we haven't earned it yet. I can't tell you how many demonstrations I've been at where one of the spokespersons was a member of the Israeli Arab Palestinian community. That's a first. It's a first. At the beginning, they said, shh, don't talk about it. Because it, you know, like, don't do it. We're trying to build a huge coalition and you're going to ruin it. Because that's one where, so it's going to take time. It's a very slow process. This last election was the first time in the history of the State of Israel where 40 seats in the Knesset, 45 seats, 48 seats, represented Jews who voted knowing that they were willing to enter into a coalition with an Arab party. The last time Mansour Abbas entered, but people didn't know that that's what they were voting for. Now they knew fully well. A coalition is going to include Mansour Abbas. And it might even include some segments of the joint list. Some. And people are now arguing which part. Balad, no. Chadash, maybe yes. Mishute, like which part? It's a conversation. But we have a long way to go. The reality is that when we came home, we still deep down believe that we came to a land without a people, which was perfect for a people without a land. And there are 2.2 million Israeli Arab Palestinians who we Israeli Jews still haven't figured it out. And in 2018, we create and legislate the basic law of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. And unlike other similar laws, the Israeli Arab Palestinians, 20% of the country aren't mentioned. Their status is not mentioned. In Israel, in the public discourse, there's a juxtaposition between Israel as a Jewish state and Israel as the state of all of its citizens. This is current lingo. Medina Yehudit or Medinat Kol Ezracheh. Now, just to clarify, there is no such thing in the world as a country which is not the country of all of its citizens. North Korea is a country of all of its citizens. The definition of a country, now you might discriminate and not give someone citizenship. That's something else. It's not the state of all of its inhabitants. It is the state of all of its citizens. It's a tautology. A country is the country of its citizens. That's what it means. But in Israel, there's a debate. Are we a Jewish state or a state of all of our citizens, as if it's even possible to be a Jewish state which is not the state of all of its citizens? And they have a very ambivalent place in this whole conversation. Part of what I find exhilarating is that as Israeli Jews are debating the essence of democracy, the rights of Israeli Arab Palestinians are on the table more than ever before. So while Ben Gvir gets votes by speaking about them, and them used to be the terrorist outside, and after May 2021, it becomes the Israeli Arab Palestinian in Israel who's threatening us. There's now a counter conversation. So it's starting. And the thing that's most, you see, as a teacher, it's exhilarating to see change starting. It's frustrating because it's never quick. It's never overnight. It just doesn't work that way. It's slow. It's small little steps. You know, it's Levine, Justice Minister Levine, now having public conversations with Mansour Abbas. Like, the irony, it's just too funny. It's just like it's a riot. You also have to laugh a little bit about how stupid we are. But it's like here, who just 5 months ago, Netanyahu, Levine, Mansour Abbas is a terrorist, right? Now speaking to Mansour Abbas about whether he would be willing to back judicial reform in exchange for the Likud changing its mantra about him. I couldn't make this up. Even if I tried, I couldn't make it up. Now, I follow 14 news sites. I spend over 2 hours a day between the morning till late at night, following 14 news sites, because it's part of my job. I have to know. So you gotta follow, like the things out there, it's just remarkable. So these are little steps. As to the Palestinians in the West Bank, there is no West Bank in Israel. There's only Judea and Samaria, and there's zero conversation. Nothing. They are completely transparent when it comes to Israeli society. In the demonstrations, there's a add-on of people who are speaking about kibush. It's an add-on. It's a very small part of the demonstrations, on the sidelines, never allowed onto the main stage. That is a complete stalemate in Israeli society. My own long-term strategy is that we have to change the way Israeli Jews and North American Jews see Israeli Arab Palestinians. And when we make progress there will be grounds for talking about progress in Judea and Samaria. But for the vast majority of Israeli Jews, no progress is possible there. That is a territory functionally under the control of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And all we can do, the story is, all we can do is defend ourselves.
So I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll open it up to.
Are we doing okay? I apologize. I'm very heavy.
You're doing great. This is the lightest I've heard you in many years, actually. So, I imagine that the last thing you said is the reason for the Center for Shared Society that the Institute. It's weird to call it Hartman to you, because you are Rabbi Hartman. So what's surprising for me in this conversation, having studied with you for the last 8 or 9 years, is this is the most optimistic, I think, energized and optimistic about the future that I've heard you, and I'm a little surprised by that. So if you could, I'm the glass is half empty guy. So just
Really?
I am. It's hard for me. I work on seeing the glass half full, but my nature takes a lot of work to see it that way for me.
Can we talk about that?
Not in front of everyone. Would you indulge me a little bit and share one outcome of what's happening that's actually scary for you?
I am the cup is half full. That's the way I live my whole life. There's nothing scary for me right now. There's going to be short-term pain, but there's nothing scary. The short-term pain is that this government will, in all likelihood, serve out its term. They will pass tens of legislations and policies that range from horrific to the bizarre. Truly bizarre. Like in the midst of this time right now, we really need to pass a Pesach in the hospital, a chametz in the hospital. Like it was like funny. So now we have to train our dogs not to smell explosives, but to smell chametz. It's like we're going to need a new, what do they call those, Magna, whatever they Magnum, whoops, beep, beep, beep. Do you have chametz? It's like you could almost, it's just too strange in the midst of our time that you're actually thinking about this, but God bless you. And God bless you Because at the end of the day, the reason why I'm not frightened is that every legislation that passes is another nail in the coffin of the current status quo in Israeli society. I have absolutely no fears. I know. Doesn't mean I'm right, by the way. I want to be really clear. I have very definitive opinions, but I never claim that they're true. They're my opinions. Like, I don't claim the truth. Like, life might change. But there is no way that the current coalition status quo is going to stay. It's changed. Donald, my friend, chair of the board of Shalom Hartman Institute North America, you, the minute the elections, I wrote in the Times of Israel. I said, what do we need to do? We need to convert. We have 40% strongly in the side of the liberal Zionist camp. We have to convert 10% of those who are currently in the right wing to move and join a new national coalition, and double the size of the Israeli Arab Palestinians who are willing to join. And if we then have 55% in our coalition, that's close to 70 seats in the Knesset, and we'll win. That's what I wrote back then. I was always optimistic. Well, guess what happened, my friends? 30% of the voters who voted for the Likud now poll and say, we're not going to vote for the Likud again. I wanted Tim. It's like, I wasn't optimistic enough. 20% have shifted. If I was really worried right now, if I was a Haredi or religious Zionist, I'd be really worried right now. Because once Netanyahu is not at the center, at least a third of the Likud are normal people. They always were normal. Just crazy people have ascended. Truly lunatics have become, and it was a strategy. And again, it's nothing to do with Likud ideology. It has to do with the particular members of the Knesset, complete, total lunatics. Like, people who give certain people in your political system a run for their money. Like, you would know some of them. Like, they would like, some, like, really, I'm not getting into your into your world. I'm not even going near there.
It's a good
idea. Like, I don't need that headache. It's
Me
bad
neither.
enough that you have that headache. So they've already now, imagine a third, half of the Likud, Gantz polling at 29, 30, Yesh Atid polling between 17 to, right now, you have coalitions of 65, 67, even now, without the Likud party. There is a new coalition which has nothing to do with the worrying about the demographics of the Haredim. 70% of Israeli Jews are liberal Jews and liberal Zionists. And they were willing to give up their liberal Judaism and liberal Zionism for the sake of the coalition. But when there's going to be a new opportunity, so you're right, I know, you want the cup that's half the part that scares me? I'm not scared. We're just going to have a hard time. We're going to have a hard time for 3 years. Ben Gvir, who's now doing huff and puff, he's going to push, and then he's going to start doing certain laws and promulgate more fear, and Netanyahu will do it, and the Haredi parties will come back, and there'll be more legislations, and there'll be stuff. Every one of the legislations which passes is going to be a gift, because they will all be able to be overturned, and they're all going to serve as a mirror to the Israelis and to Jewish people around the world. Is this an Israel you want? Is this really what you wanted? You know, there was this term in this coalition, it's called Yamin al Maleh. Right, how would I translate it? A full right-wing government. Now, Netanyahu never in his career wanted a full right-wing government. Never did. Hated it. He always wanted people to his left. He never wanted to be the most left-wing person in the party, in the government. And more than that, you know who Netanyahu really counted on to keep Israel sane? Can I tell you a secret? Do you know who he really counted on? An activist Supreme Court. Because he could sit with crazies and he would say to them, I know, I'm with you. I'm a simpatico. You know me. Like, I'm with you. But what can we do? The Supreme Court won't let us. And so the Supreme Court enabled, because Netanyahu at its core, before the trial, was a sane, responsible politician. Something happened to him. It's human. No, he's traumatized. So I'm not afraid right now. There's going to be hardships, but hardships don't frighten me. Like, welcome to the Jewish people. Like, really? Like, we're worried about hardships? Like, that's just my life. You know what I mean? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just sort of what we've done. So, right now, there's going to be short-term pain. I'm actually not, I think the relationship of North American Jewry to Israel is going to become, if people listen to me, more exciting and more invested and connected. Again, there might be some short-term losses, but, I see the future is very bright. We're going to win. We've already won. We've already won. The legislation is not passing the way it was. We have. Now, we just have to bring it home. And we could bring home a different story about Israel. There'll be bumps. What does concern me is the occupation. But that's not new. That does concern me. But even though it concerns me, I don't know how to bring it to an end anyway. I just don't. Maybe what am I worried about? There are some Jews who are adopting horrific policies. We're in the midst of a cultural war in Israel, and I think we're winning. And so, get involved. Let your voice be heard. Don't ask permission. And enjoy the ride, because great things are coming. Thank you.
So we're going to have some time to ask some questions, but I have to preface the questions with the following. You have an opportunity to hear from a great public intellectual in Israel and here in the American Jewish community as well. A man who is not only a scholar, but also has built a formidable institution in Israel that works many different sectors of Israeli society, from the military to education to the public square. So please ask a question. Don't use this as an opportunity to share a 20-minute preface, which is not a question. Okay? Promise? Great.
Really is a question. I understand how powerful the protests are in Israel, because the Israelis are really indicating what they will support, they won't support, how they'd vote, what they'll tolerate, what they're against. If we protest, we are not vote. What is it that we're indicating in a way that would change, that would make a difference to the government there?
Okay, great. Please remember, those who protest are still in the minority. Protest is not about overturning a government. It's about public perception. It's about mood creation. It's about the shaping of narratives and conversations about what Israel is. Come on in. You're part of that. And it will, I can tell you, it will give huge strength to the Israeli Jews who are fighting for the Israel that you care about. It's an opportunity also to put forth Israel is a concern of Jews around the world. It is. So all of those, it's about perception. It's about telling a story. It also, by the way, it's about changing you. Because your children are going to ask, what did you do? What did you do? Where were you? Oh, I cared a lot? Or are you going to say, I did something? I did it. It's important for you, it's important for your children, and it is critical for the restructuring of a new story about Israel. And it's not just shaped in the ballot. That ultimately will have to manifest itself in the ballot. But ballots are just a small part of the shaping of a country's self-identity.
First of all, I want to thank you for the exhilaration and optimism. It's good to feel it again. So you started off in one part of your conversation talking about the protests in Israel. And in Israel, you have a population that, in general, is very informed and involved in government. Do you think that you can trust American Jews to be granular enough to protest with intelligence?
Sure. What do you think, you're less intelligent than Israeli Jews? Not at all. You're not at all. What do you think? Do you know how many people in Israel know the fine point? No. People don't. But use it as an opportunity, by the way. Another benefit will be that when you demonstrate, do so with integrity. And therefore, what should you do? Learn. Learn. Become responsible. So, do I trust? No, if I trust you, how could I? For over 75 years, I've trusted you. For 75 years, you've been responsible, great friends of Israel, and responsible lovers. Too responsible from my perspective. So of course I trust you. And you know what? It's like I find that when you trust someone, they rise to the occasion.
What does liberal Judaism have to offer the Haredi in Israel?
Fear. Fear. They're frightened. Now, there's also movements in the Haredi community. There's a movement called New Haredi. The Haredim today aren't the same Haredim from 20 years ago. They're moving. Please, I want you to remember, and it's important to know, the great assimilationist movements in Jewish history all start with whom? Haredim. Yep. The two people all say, oh, what causes assimilation? Liberal Judaism? You just don't know Jewish history. I apologize. The two greatest assimilationist movements in Jewish history, the beginning of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, when people came from people who were given a choice, all or nothing, and what did they choose? Nothing. Haredi community doesn't know how to deal with the outside world. The only way they know how to survive is in the ghetto, where they could. That's why kashrut in the Haredi world is not about unifying the Jewish people. Kashrut is about whose house I don't eat at. It's like, and if you adopt a certain policy, my kashrut has to change. So it's like, I need ghettos. I use food, I use language, I use dress, I use neighborhoods. I use things to create this ghetto. Now, Israel is the only country which has created a sustainable Haredi ghetto. United States, in the New York area as well. Different, though. It's breaking down. In the Haredi community today, there are almost no anti-Zionists anymore. Yeah, they're all Zionists. Almost all of them. They can't say it because they don't have a word for it. But they're almost all Zionists. They care about the country. They're invested in the country. You know, like the thing about a duck. You know, if it quacks like a duck and walks like all of the above, then it's a duck. Well, if you're a minister in the government, now, by the way, they used to be deputy ministers in ministries in which there is no minister. Did you get that one? I'm a deputy minister in a ministry which doesn't have a minister. So what are you? Listen, we're Jews, we sell chametz. It's not mine. No, I don't have any chametz on Pesach. I sold it. It's not mine. We sell chametz. That's what they did. They're making this shtick. Their heads up. They're involved and invested in the country. They speak now about it's not appropriate for a Jewish country to do aid. When would a Haredi even think about that? So there are things that are happening. In the Haredi community, they've already made clear distinctions in which almost no Haredi politician will get up and say religious coercion is legitimate. I don't religiously coerce anybody. In the public sphere, it's not about coercion, it's about the identity of the country. So liberal Judaism, it's creeping in, but mostly it's frightening to them. Well, what will happen in 3-4 years when the new coalition is formed? The Haredi parties will be invited, as they should, to join, but with a new set of rules. You get to decide about the things that are important for your community. You don't get to decide my Judaism. And that was what the Haredim in the past always cared about. It was the religious Zionists were more confused, but religious Zionists are completely agnostic on issues of state and religion. That's just not their issue. Remember, Bennett, the religious Zionist, is the one who wanted to start the egalitarian kotel. It's just not their issue. So the Haredim are going to have to readjust to a new country. But liberal Judaism itself, for them, it's what frightens them. And we have to respect that. My job is not to redeem ultra-Orthodoxy from its lack of modernity. My job is to redeem Israel from their stranglehold over my religion. That's a separate story, but liberal Judaism itself is just not theirs.
All right, last question, Donniel.
I'll hang around. Again, it wasn't me picking who, what, and where, so blame Ethan.
Hi, I also want to thank you for your optimism. And it was incredible to hear that you're not scared, because you're the first Israeli in several months that I've heard say they're not terrified. And I was wondering if you could share your perspective on a scenario that I am hearing from a lot of Israelis. Budget passes at the end of May. Judicial reform goes through in 5 seconds. Supreme Court tries to overturn it. The government ignores them. And there's an explosion both figuratively and literally.
Again, that's not going to happen. I watch, again, the truth is, I never got the genre called horror movies. I don't get the enjoyment out of it. I never did. Could I make up a horror scenario? First of all, as it is now, the reform is not going to pass. It's not even being put forth. Netanyahu, they know it's not passing. The reality is, we're so used to losing. That's like we're like an abused child. We don't we just don't know what to do. Like we just only work to a certain world. The truth is that in a democracy, every vote counts. That's true. But in a society, there are individuals who are more powerful and who have greater weight. There just are. Those who serve in certain units of the army have more power over the future direction of the country. Those who are bringing in tax dollars have more impact on the future of the country. So in the ballot, it's true, one person, one vote. But when policies have to be determined, if 45% of Israel's tax revenue is brought in from the high-tech sector, if that changes, then the life of everyone, including those who are yamin al-maleh, are impacted. And it's known. The reason why the reform wasn't even brought up is that it wasn't going to pass because there were 10 members of the Likud party who weren't going to vote for it. They're less frightened right now. They're still frightened. But when push comes to shove, they're not going to bring the country to a apocalyptic moment. And by the way, neither will Netanyahu. That's not who he is. Personally, I don't vote for him. He's not an evil man. He's not. He's done great things for Israel. And I owe a deep, deep debt of gratitude to him. Truly. And I've trained myself, by the way, to feel that. Because it doesn't come naturally in political debates. But it's a worthwhile thing to train yourself. Like, he's a serious man. He's always been a serious man. So it's that scenario in theory. You want to know something that scares me? I'll tell you something that scares me. What happens when we don't have an apocalyptic scenario to inspire the demonstrations? Because it's easy to bring people out when we're all used to in Israel, everything has to be life or death. Life or death. Everything is the end. Everything is the end. It's not. It's not the end. And if there is some reform of the judiciary, is that the end of democracy? No, it isn't. Oh, if the coalition will elect 2 members of the Supreme Court, it will not be the same Supreme Court ever again. Really? Come on. You talk about being serious, we all have to be serious. We're going to have to compromise. Before this came up, did I ever worry about the Supreme Court? Never. I was happy. Supreme Court was perfect because it did for me what it does for most Israelis. It enabled Israelis not to think about issues of human rights and democracy because Supreme Court will worry about it. It was that which stopped us from falling over the cliff. But I have come to learn that there are serious problems with the Supreme Court. There are. While the reform will create the weakest Supreme Court in any democracy in the world, the current situation is a Supreme Court which is the most powerful Supreme Court in any democracy in the world. The way it is now. The truth is, when you actually study it, it's insane. Really is. It's just strange. So, what will happen will be not the reform. It won't be the end. The Supreme Court probably, when it reaches that moment, will not pass. It's because it's not going to be the whole thing. Nobody's going to do that. The president is going to... There's so many other social checks and balances. Checks and balances not in the government, but in the positions of real power. What frightens me is whether these groups will stand up and fight for the future of Israel when it's not a life or death narrative. Because the truth is, and this is a good place to end, at issue is not the Supreme Court. That's not the issue. At issue is what the Supreme Court protected Israelis from. We're going to have not an apocalyptic moment. we're going to have 1,000 cuts. And our challenge, and this is why you got to come out, is are we going to demonstrate for the little cuts? Are we going to keep this up? Are we going to continue to push? Not for an Israel that has a right to be, but an Israel that has a responsibility to be a great country. Now, that, I am, to fight that, I fought the other fight. I fought it personally. My family fought it personally. We have paid every price that a family should pay. I know that fight. I know how to do it. And I know the price it extracts. But to now participate in the fight for the greatness of this country, the apocalyptic scenario, I don't need it. I don't need it to inspire me, and I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. My problem is that too many people are feeding off of it. It's our Holocaust syndrome. It's like, in order to get inspired, Jews have to die. Like, the future has to be bleak. Now, how about us getting inspired because the future is bright? Like, will you show up for that? So, I know it's out there. When I look at all the forces at play in Israel right now, the government itself knows that that's not realistic. The debate in the Likud is already not pushing for that. What do you think? They don't read the polls? If you're a Likud member, you supported Netanyahu because he was the, what do you call the goose that gives the golden, what is it? Is that, I said it right? He was the ticket. He gave you 35 seats guaranteed. And what do you want? Do you want to be part of the winning team? And now they're down to 20, 22. What do you think? They don't know? So they know that the state of Israel, that this was wrong. Could it have been done better? Sure. Could a reform have been passed? Sure. But you needed people to have read the situation, planned it differently. The whole thing was one huge, it's a shul, so I can't say, bleep up. It starts with an F. It was just one total caca. That's, I'm allowed to say that, right? so that, now, they lost that scenario. Now, it's converting those people to get off of the apocalypse and to fight, to go higher, is the challenge we face. And I want to tell you, please, we need you in it. Show up, make a plan, and then let's celebrate the future that is now possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to, before you leave, thank you, Donniel, for coming, for speaking with us. Thank you to Ethan and all the crew at Hartman for organizing tonight. I just have two announcements. We've had the privilege of having a lot of organizations come and speak about Israel over the last couple months here at Bethel, and that is continuing. Our Israel 360 group, our next big talk is on May 30th at 7:30 p.m. It's a Tuesday night here at Bethel. It's called Israel at a Crossroads with Dr. Eric Mandel, who is the director of the Middle East Political Information Network. So I hope you'll join us for that. And Hartman always has amazing programs, but fortunately for you, their programs are not just for rabbis or for Jewish professionals, but also for leaders in the Jewish community or community members more broadly. And so they have the Community Leadership Program at the Hartman Institute. You have an opportunity to study at the Hartman Institute in Israel. This summer, it's June 21st through the 28th. So if you're able to be in Israel during that time, I really want to encourage you to try to sign up for CLP. I know it promises to be an amazing program, June 21st through the 28th. And again, I'm going to turn over back now to Rabbi Schuck, but I want to thank Donniel for coming.